Germany has been reported as being effective curbing the COVID-19 spread throughout the pandemic compared to its Western European neighbors. However, the country is now seeing its highest daily numbers of COVID-19. How is the country responding to the new spike, and how has the pandemic affected the Kazakh-German relations? I'll talk about this with the German ambassador to Kazakhstan, Mr. Tilo Klinner. Mr. Ambassador, welcome.
Thank you very much for having me here.
Mr. Ambassador, Germany is now having its highest daily numbers of COVID-19 cases, and the German government has just announced new restriction measures that came into force on Monday, November the 2nd. What are the new measures?
Well, actually, the measures are multifold. One of it is a so-called partial lockdown, which means that restaurants, gyms, and other places where people would meet are closed again, which is very difficult for the hospitality industry and for all these sectors who have now new restrictions, but it is a measure which is short of a general lockdown, so it would help to keep the economy still going. So that's important. For the borders, we do have now in future a quarantine of 5 days, and that's without exception, because people think that the COVID test may only show a little bit later the presence of an infection. But after 5 days, you can leave the quarantine once you present a negative COVID test.
Mr. Ambassador, well, Germany is now having its highest numbers throughout the pandemic. The daily numbers are over 16,000 at the moment. What are the reasons for the spike?
Well, we were actually expecting this development because now the climatic situation has changed, so people are more indoors. With being more indoors, there's an increased risk of contracting a disease, which is normally transmitted by droplets and by having people too close together. That's the first element. Number two is something we still want to keep up, but it represents a certain risk, is keeping open the schools and universities. Because we think it is very important to return to the offline classes, because for children, especially in the schools, it is very important to be at school. We obviously have this online solutions, but you find out, and WHO has supported that too, that especially the children from lesser advantageous families who have not enough money, who do not have the latest IT technology, they are kind of losing contact with the education. And that should be avoided.
Germany was one of the countries that had been successful curbing the spread of the pandemic throughout spring. And the numbers have been lower than of the neighboring Western European countries. Many attribute that to the decisive action taken by the government, early testing. What are some of the measures that helped Germany sustain some of the numbers?
Well, I think it's a mix of factors you have here. One of them is even not something we have deserved in a way, but the first wave of the pandemic came mostly from Italy to Germany, so we had a certain warning time before. The second point is we do have a very developed health system with a large capacity of hospital places and also intensive care units in the hospitals. By the way, before the pandemic, many people were criticizing it as being overly developed. So now this did help at this particular situation, where the risk is that the hospitals are overrun with patients at a certain moment. So we were never beyond 50% of the intensive care units we had. That's good, and we hope it stays this way, because we still don't know how the numbers will develop over the next months.
Mr. Ambassador, German Chancellor Angela Merkel has had high approval rates throughout the pandemic due to an effective response against the crisis caused by the pandemic. And generally, there have been views in the media as well that the countries led by women have dealt with the crisis much better than the countries led by men, although we don't have enough countries led by women to actually have a qualitative or quantitative study to prove that view. What is your view on that?
Well, that's an interesting question, which is asked by a woman to a man, but I try to, to answer. There is a certain aspect that women may be very sensitive to factors beyond the economy, because it's always a trade-off, and people who are actually stressing the economic factor would like to open as quick as possible. Whereas if you have a more holistic view, then you would be more careful and trying to balance the measures. But I would not attribute this only to women.
Mr. Ambassador, travel has been limited throughout the pandemic. It was non-existent in spring. Flights to Frankfurt are now available through Air Astana. Who among the Kazakh citizens can travel to Germany at the moment?
By and large, to simplify it, because the rules are a little bit complicated, is people who have a particular reason to come to Germany. So that concerns business people, it concerns people visiting their direct relatives. It is people who are invited to very important celebrations. It's about people having their education in Germany, so that's something which was very important in the month of September, when the universities, for instance, start to work. So we managed to bring all the students who were originally accepted by the universities. Also, we made it possible that they could start to study in Germany in time. Same thing for students who go still to schools. But there, it's not for the short-term stays, but it has to be more than 6 months, so practically a whole scholar year. So if they go there, they are also accepted. Then we have Kazakh-Germans who have also their relatives in Germany, and they will be allowed to travel there. Same thing with family reunions. So there are many exceptions to the rule. The rule is, with no reason, you are not allowed or eligible for a visa now, but we try to make it possible for all the important cases to still allow them to travel.
And visa issuance has been continued for these cases?
We have issued visas through all the pandemic. From February till now, there was not a single day where we're closing down the visa section completely.
Mr. Ambassador, you've just touched upon the historical ties we have with Germany. Kazakhstan has about 180,000 ethnic Germans living here, and Germany has about a population of 1 million repatriants who are originally from Kazakhstan. How important are these ties for our relations between the two countries, and what role do these people play?
I think they play a very important role in the relationship of our two countries. It's actually a lot of other nations envy us for that, because we have these people who can actually act in both places as their home, and they know their way around, they know the language, so that is very helpful. In many regards, it helps Kazakh companies in Germany. It does help certainly the German companies here in Kazakhstan, because if you look at it, in most of them, people who are, the Germans who are there are ethnic Germans who actually came in the 90s to Germany, or their children.
Mr. Ambassador, you've just touched upon some of the business relations and that these people actually help advance the business relations. Trade with Kazakhstan accounts for the majority of Germany's foreign trade with the Central Asian region. In the past 15 years, the German businesses have invested 4.2 billion euros in the Kazakh economy. How is the situation now? What did the business say?
Well, actually, you're right. About 80% of the trade with Central Asia is with Kazakhstan. So Kazakhstan is a centerpiece of our activities here in Central Asia. How it will develop further? Well, first of all, we always tried to keep up the very positive impulse we had from the visits of President of Kazakhstan, Kassym-Jomart Tokayev, in Germany. We had 2 visits actually last year, or we had one in December and one in February. In Germany, and they gave a tremendous impulse to developing our relationship further. Obviously, COVID did slow down things, projects a little bit, but we always kept up the impetus, the impulse. For instance, we have a working group with Vice Prime Minister Sklar, who is presiding this group. And we had, right from the beginning, regular meetings when it was not possible to travel. We had online meetings every month. And we had also lately, in September, also again the first delegation coming from Germany. We still have a large investment projects, like for instance, the factory for farm technology of glass, the combine, how you call them, which will be produced in Kazakhstan. So this project is going ahead as planned, and everything else is actually progressing more or less alongside the plans we originally made. There are exceptions, unfortunately. The Lufthansa flights are discontinued until March, but that's obvious, and it comes out of the realities of the air industry. Other companies have actually made even better business than last year. We are very much surprised by that, but we had poll among the German companies, and interestingly enough, especially the ones which have to do with infrastructure, building and so on, were quite successful this year.
Excellent. So you just started talking about some of the sectors that the German business is involved here in Kazakhstan. What are some of these sectors that are attractive to the German business? I know that majority of them are involved in the manufacturing, building materials, in agriculture. What are the other sectors as well that the German business are interested?
So we have infrastructure, that's probably number one. Mm-hmm. Then we have agriculture, which is very important, and we also see much more perspectives in the future. Mm-hmm. We have logistics, which is actually corresponding to the central role of Kazakhstan as a Eurasian landmass. Mm-hmm. Everything which has to do with what the Chinese call Belt and Road, but we would call it the transcontinental logistic lines. And there we have many German companies who are actually quite active. First of all, the German railways system, which is here cooperating with Kazakh-Demir Joly in large projects in transport, in personal carriage, and also in a couple of other logistical areas. Everything which has to do with the IT sector is very interesting, and we do have world leaders like SAP who are quite active here, and for instance cooperating also with Kazakh universities to develop special products here in Kazakhstan.
Mr. Ambassador, although we're trying to boost the business ties, and Kazakh president has flown to Germany twice already, there still has been a decline in the trade turnover overall since 2014 and since 2015, and part of it is also related to the oil prices, the dropping of the oil prices in 2015. With that being said, how much did the European sanctions to Russia have affected the relations between Kazakhstan and Germany?
Well, actually, we do not see too much effects of the sanctions for the trade between Kazakhstan and Germany. There are now different solutions which have been found which allow the transit through Russia, with some exceptions, but that's very complicated. But generally speaking, it works quite well. And we have actually there is no real decline of the trade relations between Kazakhstan and Germany. It's rather a value problem, and you have already mentioned it. Actually, even the German imports to Kazakhstan have risen by 7%, which is a worldwide exception. It's a worldwide leader, interesting enough. And although the Kazakh imports to Germany have not fallen by quantity, they have fallen because the price of oil went down, and because oil being, as you already mentioned, one major export good of Kazakhstan to Germany, it cannot be out of line with the world prices. So let's say you have the barrel for $80 and now you have it for $40, and you export the same quantity, then you will get half of the money. Fortunately, we have longer term contracts, so it didn't shrink as much as the price, but it did reflect in the balance.
So, Ambassador, thank you.
Thank you very much.